I don't think we need input from someone whose degree came from a night college brochure, Bryce said, smirking like he'd just solved inflation with a pie chart. The room fell into that awful laughter, the kind where nobody actually thinks it's funny, but chuckles anyway to prove they're on the winning side. Karen sat at the edge of the conference table, hands folded neatly, pulse like a war drum in her throat. Her title still said founder, strategic oversight, but everyone knew what that meant. Decorative. She might as well have been a damn ficus in a blazer. They were rehearsing for the government pitch. The $300 million transformation contract that would, in Bryce's words, elevate Stonebrook to the next echelon. His words, his swagger, his damn monogrammed pen. Karen had launched this company 15 years ago on a garage Wi-Fi signal and her cousin's refurbished ThinkPad. Now she wasn't even allowed to speak in the rehearsal. I mean, Karen's got great instincts, Bryce said, backpedaling just enough to sound fake magnanimous, but this is a different league. They want enterprise leadership, not ops nostalgia, more fake chuckles. Someone offered her a polite smile. The CEO cleared his throat and mumbled something about focus, and Karen nodded like a tranquilized yoga instructor. She could have spoken up, could have told them where the idea for this bid actually came from, her handwritten notes from a conference she wasn't invited to anymore. But she didn't. Not yet. And look, before we get deeper into this glorious dumpster fire of a story, quick sidebar. If you're listening and haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button. Only 7% of y'all are subscribed, and this story, it gets a hell of a lot messier. Like, Boardroom bag messy. Smash that like button too, because watching these hotshots implode kinda keeps our team caffeinated and slightly less jaded. Back in the room, Bryce clicked through another buzzword-slathered slide. Synergy, frictionless scaling, predictive insight. He said these things like they meant something. Karen stared at the projector light washing over his face, giving him the glow of a man who thought PowerPoint could cover incompetence. She wasn't mad, not visibly. Something in her had slipped its leash. Bryce continued parading their so-called pitch team, all carefully curated for diversity optics and linked in polish. No one over 45. No one who knew how brutal it had been in the early days when contracts were handwritten and faxed across state lines at 2 a.m. because DocuSign wasn't an option, and no one trusted digital signatures yet. He didn't want Karen's grit. He wanted glass walls and applause. After the meeting, one of the junior staffers approached her. "Hey, Miss Foster, I just wanted to say it's really cool what you built. I read the founding memo." She smiled, not unkindly. "They should make you pitch instead of him." The kid blinked. "You think? I know." Then she walked down the hallway that used to feel like hers. Her heels echoed in a place that now spoke Bryce's language, overconfidence dressed up in strategy jargon. He hadn't just replaced her, was repackaging her life's work as his own. That night, she poured a glass of red and pulled out the old files. The ones she kept on a drive named after her dog, buried so deep in the folder structure even Bryce's Golden Boy IT team would miss it. A 2022 revision to the operating agreement. The one no one remembered. But she did. She'd co-authored it. The clause was still there, clean, binding, signed by the board and legal. All federal projects over $50 million require final sign-off from the designated key operational officer, Karen Foster. She took a slow sip of wine, the kind of sip you take when the war's already started and nobody else knows. Yet, 2 weeks later, the press release dropped like Bryce's ego after a spelling bee, loud, overpolished, and missing key details. Stonebrook wins $300 million federal contract to transform legacy systems across 14 agencies. There was Bryce in the center of the photo, teeth white enough to guide ships at night, flanked by the core leadership team handpicked for optics and obedience. The article called him visionary, decisive, and Karen's favorite, a generational leader. She read it 3 times before her coffee even cooled. Her name wasn't mentioned. Not once. Didn't hit like a slap. It hit like a shovel in wet clay, deep, cold, and packed with insult. The kicker, she found out she wasn't on the org chart through a memo. Not a call, not even a BCC. Just a forwarded Slack message from a junior analyst who didn't know any better. "Hey Karen, guessing this was a mistake? You're not listed under Project Execution Team, LMK." Attached was a PDF chart. Bryce at the top, followed by a waterfall of yes men and token titles. Karen wasn't on the tree, not even a stub branch. The contract, her contract, the one born from her back-channel conversations at a forgotten trade conference in Tampa, had been scrubbed of her entirely. She didn't respond to the message. She didn't rage text legal. Instead, she opened the shared drive, navigated to the folder marked Strategy Archive 2022 and started scrolling. They'd forgotten she co-wrote the updated operating agreement. They'd forgotten the clause she fought to add after watching another company implode when a hotshot VP tried to override governance in pursuit of efficiency. But she hadn't forgotten. Somewhere around clause 4.2b, found it again? All federally sourced projects exceeding $50 million in value must obtain final operational sign-off from the key operational officer as designated in Appendix C. Appendix C, Karen Foster. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling tiles like they might offer divine commentary. Nothing came, just the faint buzz of office HVAC and a pigeon tap dancing on the windowsill. Let him have his little parade. Built this company on systems, structure, and a savage memory for buried policy. Across town, Bryce was holding court in a champagne-soaked meeting with their investor, Owen Feldman, the closest thing Stonebrook had to a quiet godfather. The man didn't raise his voice, didn't play fast, and didn't like surprises. "I want to see governance before we finalize," Owen said, swirling his water with a distaste usually reserved for lukewarm shrimp cocktail. Bryce waved him off like an Uber rating. "All standard. Legal's reviewing it. We've got full sign-off, nothing to flag." Owen blinked once. Slowly, "Still, I'd like to see it." Bryce didn't say no. He just nodded with the sort of dismissive confidence that comes from thinking you're bulletproof. Meanwhile, Karen was building her quiet arsenal. She printed the clause, annotated it, highlighted every connected policy and internal compliance rule that tied her role directly to the deal. She opened an old email thread with their legal counsel from 2 years ago. She'd flagged the clause back then with a note. "Let's keep this simple and binding. I've seen too many cowboys try to ride federal contracts without a saddle." Legal had replied, added, executed, smart inclusion. She reread that thread like scripture. Then she did something Bryce would have laughed at. She printed it all, paper, binder, tabs, physical evidence that couldn't be accidentally archived. She labeled it simply Govkin Clause Active. In the hallway that afternoon, someone asked her if she was heading to the internal launch party. Karen smiled. "Not yet, still prepping. Let Bryce pop corks. Let the board toast their golden boy." She didn't need confetti. She had the only thing that mattered, a signature that wasn't his to give. Karen didn't storm into legal. He didn't make a scene or file a complaint or barge into Bryce's glass-walled lair with the fury of a woman wronged. That would have been satisfying, sure, but it wasn't her style. She took the back stairs, wore flats instead of heels, carried no laptop, just a manila folder and a memory sharper than any NDA. The legal team was mostly new, shiny graduates who thought precedent was a coffee order. At the end of the hallway sat someone who still remembered when Stonebrook ran payroll out of a checking account with overdraft protection, Barbara Hall. Barb had been at Stonebrook long enough to remember when Karen still signed her emails sent from my BlackBerry. Karen knocked gently on the frame. "Got 5 minutes for an old ghost." Barb looked up from her screen, smiled, and gestured her in. "I'm looking for a specific document," Karen said, setting the folder on the desk. "Operating Agreement, 2022 revision. Should have been filed under Corporate Governance Updates. I co-authored it with legal before the new board structure kicked in." Barb's smile faltered, just a flicker. "Oh, I remember that one," she said, typing with the elegance of a concert pianist. "Was wondering when someone was going to ask about it. Nobody's touched that folder in over a year. Not even Bryce," Barb chuckled. "Please, if it didn't come with a slide deck and fake metrics." He didn't open it. 2 minutes later, she handed over a printed copy. "You might want to bookmark Appendix C. That's the one with your clause." Karen flipped through the pages like a woman rereading a will, one she knew named her the sole heir. There it was. Appendix C, Operational Oversight Authority Designation. Karen Foster Scope, required signatory on all federally sourced contracts exceeding $50 million in value, including transformation initiatives, procurement reform, and system modernization. There was her name, her ink, her protection against every slick-talking corporate climber with a PowerPoint fetish and no idea how government compliance actually worked. She looked up. "Thanks, Barb. Mind if I borrow your copier?" Barb grinned. "Take the good stapler too. This feels like a good stapler situation." That afternoon, Karen made one phone call, no texting, no email trail, just voice. "Hey, it's me," she said when her former deputy answered. "Karen, holy hell, how are you?" "Wait, are you? Did you see the announcement? Bryce is acting like he wrote the Constitution." Karen smiled faintly. "Yeah, I saw. Listen, quick question. Has the compliance packet gone to the client yet?" There was a pause. Papers shuffled. Not yet. We're still finalizing the org chart and the attestation forms. Bryce is taking his time. Perfect, Karen said. Let me know the second he files anything. No delay. Should I be worried? Not yet, but he should be. She hung up and stared at the printed agreement. In her hands was the pin to the grenade. Legally, that contract was DOA without her signature. Not a suggestion, not a courtesy, a requirement. Bryce hadn't just sidelined her, he'd walked into a minefield barefoot, smiling for the camera. Karen didn't need a title, she had the trigger. And Bryce, he was still out there doing press hits, calling himself the architect of transformation, which was rich considering he thought Gantt charts were a type of fancy dessert. Back in her office, smaller now, tucked near the freight elevator, Karen started her own quiet dossier. Emails, dates, copies. Every step Bryce took without her sign-off was a nail. And she was building the coffin. The launch party looked like it had been designed by an algorithm that read too many Forbes articles. Floor-to-ceiling banners with bold slogans like reinventing government, redefining excellence. Jazz quartet in one corner, overpriced hors d'oeuvres in the other. Everyone wore their best "this is my moment" smile, even the interns who'd been told to just network. Bryce stood front and center in a tailored navy suit that cost more than Karen's first car. In his hand, a glass of Veuve Clicquot. In his mouth, a victory speech that sounded like it had been spat out by ChatGPT and approved by a PR intern on Adderall. And none of this would be possible without vision, grit, and innovation, Bryce declared. This contract isn't just about systems, it's about people. It's about a team that dares to think bigger, smarter, faster. Polite claps, nod from the CEO, wink from the head of comms. And of course, Bryce continued with a practiced pause and glance toward the back of the room. We want to acknowledge Karen Foster for her past contributions to the company's early growth. Early growth. The phrase sat in her stomach like expired shrimp. Karen stood near the catering table, sipping sparkling water and gripping her clutch so hard her knuckles ached. Past contributions, like she was the woman who once brought in donuts and then quietly retired to Arizona. She gave a nod, not a smile, just enough movement to let the cameras catch it if they bothered to. After the toasts, after the photo ops, after Bryce finished shaking hands like a politician trying to remember donors' names, the crowd began to loosen. That was when Owen Feldman appeared. The investor didn't need to wear a suit to command attention, wore a quarter zip and loafers, and still made people step aside when he walked past. He didn't hover, he approached, and he did so now slowly, a glass of club soda in one hand and the same unreadable expression he'd worn during every earnings call. Karen, Owen. He glanced around. Bryce was still basking in the attention of junior staffers and one particularly enthusiastic reporter from Tech Vantage. I read the memo, Owen said softly. Which one? One with the org chart. Bryce sent it to the board this morning. Your name wasn't on it. She tilted her head as if hearing about her own erasure for the first time. Must have been an oversight. Owen didn't laugh, he never did. Should I be worried? Karen reached into her clutch and handed him a folder. Slim, tabbed, no label on the outside. He opened it briefly, glanced at the first page, and closed it again. Not yet, she said. His eyes flicked to hers. I need to escalate this. You won't need to, he will. There was no smugness in her voice, no gloating, just certainty. Like a woman who'd already won but hadn't bothered to announce it yet. Owen tapped the folder against his hand. He doesn't know, does he? Karen shook her head. He thinks paperwork is decorative, like lobby art. Owen looked toward the cluster of executives laughing at some overpolished joke. He'll figure it out eventually. Hopefully not too late. Karen walked away before the conversation turned into strategy. She didn't need alliances, not yet, but she'd planted the seed in the most calculating mind at Stonebrook. And Owen wasn't the type to let a $300 million contract rest on someone who thought a compliance packet was optional. Back in her car, she sat for a moment, engine off, staring at the reflection of the building in her windshield. Inside, Bryce was probably still sipping his champagne. He didn't need a toast. She had the clause. She had the date stamps. She had the paper. And when the music stopped, she'd still be holding the chair. 3 days after the party, Karen walked into her office and noticed the silence felt different, not peaceful, not empty, scrubbed. Her access badge still worked, but her calendar had vanished. No invites. No standing strategy syncs. Even her color-coded tags, years of meetings tracked down to the minute, were gone, like someone had selected her whole digital life and hit delete row. It wasn't unexpected, just faster than she thought. She sat down, opened her laptop, and clicked through her limited dashboard. Most of the shared folders she used to manage were now read-only. Her name had been quietly removed from 3 Slack channels, and then it landed. A blind copied email. Subject: Governance Alignment Signature Reorg from legal@stonebrook.com to B. Landon at Stonebrook.com BCC. K. Foster at Stonebrook.com per your request. This confirms initiation of the executive transition process. Attached: formal documentation removing Ms. Foster from all active signatory roles, effective immediately. Legal Ops Karen read it twice, then once more. The phrasing was sharp, bureaucratic, and cowardly. Not a single person had spoken to her. Not the board, not HR, not even the CEO. They'd let Bryce push the button and walked away whistling. She wasn't just being eased out, she was being stripped, and that's when she understood. He was moving fast because he knew he was vulnerable. She opened her private folder, the one Bryce didn't know existed, the one buried in the compliance server with access granted only to the old general counsel, retired and left her as backup. She found the timestamp doc from legal, Key Operational Officer Signatory Clause enacted 2022. Still active, still binding, still hers, and then her phone buzzed, a text from Owen Feldman. Owen, Bryce just sent over the final deck. He's listed as the sole signatory for the contract packet. Is that correct? She stared at it for a long time, then replied, Karen, not even remotely. In the meantime, she called her former deputy again. Please tell me, Karen said, you've seen the compliance packet. A pause. Yeah, just came through. Bryce filed it directly. Said we needed to hit submission by EOD or risk slipping deliverable timelines. Did you see who signed it? Only Bryce. No secondary, no coup, nope, just him. Karen didn't curse. She didn't scream. She closed her eyes and let the moment pass like a slow exhale of poison. He'd done it. Had officially submitted a federal compliance packet on a $300 million government contract, without including the legally required signatory. Her. He had pushed her out without understanding what she actually did. Karen opened her email and began drafting a new message. To Owen Feldman CC, Legal, CEO, Board Chair Subject. Immediate Governance Clarification Contract, #4483 Adirall. Been informed of the final compliance packet submitted to the client by Mr. Landon on date. As a reminder, per the 2022 Operating Agreement, attached, all federally sourced contracts exceeding $50 million require final sign-off by the designated Key Operational Officer. I remain that officer on record. To date, I have not been contacted to review or authorize the submission. Therefore, the current filing may be deemed non-compliant and void under Section 4.2b of the governing agreement. Happy to clarify or provide documentation as needed. Best, Karen Foster. She didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, she saved it in drafts. This wasn't the moment. This was the setup. They tried to erase her, and in doing so, broken the one rule you never break with a founder who still holds the original damn blueprints. Don't mistake silence for absence, because silence is just the sound right before the detonation. Karen waited 2 days, just enough time for Bryce to think the silence meant he'd won, that his name on the signature line had somehow closed a chapter instead of opening a case file. By then, the press cycle had started. Tech outlets were running puff pieces about Stonebrook's bold leap into federal transformation, quoting Bryce like he was the second coming of contract reform. Karen, meanwhile, sat in a quiet conference room with a whiteboard, 3 binders, and a private Slack thread with exactly one participant herself. She wasn't plotting. She was reconstructing. Timeline, action, violation. It started with the original request for information, RFI, that kicked off this whole circus. Karen had written the company's response by hand during a red-eye flight after a conference no one else had bothered to attend. That RFI had listed her as the designated point of contact. Her, not Stonebrook, not the office of the CEO. Karen Foster, co-founder, strategy architect, and as specified in the RFI, proposed project lead. She still had the document, version the client had returned with margin notes, comments, and even a hand-drawn heart next to her name from one of the government analysts who thought she actually sounded like someone who gave a damn. And then Bryce submitted the formal proposal, without her name anywhere in it. She flagged the discrepancy, marked the date, took screenshots, cross-referenced internal emails. There it was. Bryce misrepresenting authority in black and white, declaring all necessary compliance has been satisfied and signatories confirmed. Except it hadn't, and they weren't. Karen picked up the phone and dialed a number she knew by heart, but hadn't used in almost 6 months. Office of Federal Digital Oversight, the voice on the other end said. She cleared her throat. Hi, this is Karen Foster from Stonebrook. I'm just following up on our contract, filing for the Legacy Systems Modernization Project, contract #4483A. I wanted to confirm who your team currently lists as the project lead. There was some tapping. A pause. It says Karen Foster. That's still accurate, right? Karen smiled. Yes, just making sure. The next move wasn't hers. It was Owen Feldman's. She hadn't sent him the formal email. She didn't need to. The folder she'd handed him at the launch party had done its work. And Owen, quiet, observant, always 10 steps ahead, understood what she was offering. Not a rebellion, a rescue. That afternoon, an all-hands board review was announced. Subject, Strategic Performance Alignment Q4 Readiness. Publicly, it looked innocuous, routine. A chance for Bryce to flash another slide deck and pat himself on the back for imaginary KPIs. But buried in the invite was a name that hadn't been on a calendar in weeks. Karen Foster, observing participant. Bryce probably saw it and shrugged, figured it was a courtesy, maybe even a favor. What he didn't realize was that every document she'd been collecting, every clause, every timestamp, every email with legal, every note in the compliance packet, every single federal filing discrepancy was now bound and indexed in a leather folder. And Owen had already read every word. Karen didn't walk into that boardroom like a ghost. She walked in like a lit fuse. She nodded to the CEO, said nothing to Bryce, took her seat at the far end of the table with no laptop, no notes, just the same folder. Bryce entered 5 minutes late with a grin that could sponsor a stock photo series. Hey everyone, ready to dive in? Karen blinked. Slowly. He didn't even realize he was standing on a chessboard where every square had already been played. Let him talk. Let him present his numbers, his buzzwords, his hollow victories. The game was already over, just hadn't heard the click yet. The boardroom was too warm. Not hot, just warm enough to make the expensive suits feel like straitjackets and the air taste like tension. The table was set with the usual pretense. Bottled water, branded folders, a projector humming like it knew what was coming. The client rep, analyzed from the Federal Oversight Office, sat at the far end. Crisp pantsuit, no jewelry, the expression of a woman who didn't like wasting time unless it came with plausible deniability. Bryce entered with the confidence of a man who thought gravity answered to him. Analyze, he grinned, extending his hand like he invented handshakes. Glad you could join us. Excited to show you what the team's been cooking. She nodded, polite but unimpressed. Just here to observe and clarify a few final compliance points before we move into escrow. Bryce clapped once. Absolutely, you're gonna love this. He flicked the remote and the screen lit up. Stonebrook Solutions Q4 strategic launch slide after slide. Bryce strutted through the presentation like a game show host with a metrics fetish. Projected savings, AI-powered transitions, unprecedented scaling velocity. It was marketing Mad Libs, glossy, vague, and absolutely empty. The board members mostly nodded along. The CEO stared at a spot on the wall. Karen watched in silence, hands folded on the same folder that hadn't moved in an hour. Then Bryce reached that slide. Execution team and compliance authority, his name was there. Big, centered, bold, Karen's wasn't. Owen Feldman shifted in his seat, slowly, like a glacier moving. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out something that didn't glow, didn't animate, didn't buzz, paper. He slid a single printed org chart across the table. No words, no drama, just the paper. See the name at the top, he said, voice dry as bone. Bryce blinked, caught off guard. Yeah, I mean, this is from an older version. We've since restructured to reflect operational alignment. Read it again, Owen said. Bryce glanced at the page, trying to keep the smirk on his face like it was glued there. Right, so Karen was foundational. No doubt. But we've adapted the structure to fit federal scaling parameters. She shifted to more of an advisory role, big picture oversight. Analyze looked up. Interesting. Because our original RFI response named Karen Foster as the proposed project lead. And as of last week, she was still listed as key operational officer in your compliance documentation. The smirk faltered. I'm sorry, last week, Bryce said. Owen leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers, spoke the words like he was ordering someone's execution through a drive-through window. Karen never stepped down. Bryce opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Karen still hadn't said a word. Owen continued, You submitted a compliance packet that named yourself as sole authority. You removed her without board vote, without procedural notice, and without updating the legal designation we all signed in 2022. The room began to shift. No one moved. The gravity changed. Surely, Bryce said, laughing nervously, we're not making a federal case out of a title box. Analyze shut her laptop. That title box dictates accountability on a federally funded, multi-agency transformation deal. Any discrepancy invalidates our ability to move forward without a formal review. The CEO let out a sound halfway between a cough and a prayer. Karen reached into her folder and slid another document across the table. Same page, different reaction. It was her original RFI draft annotated by the agency. Her name highlighted, a sticky note still attached, faded with time. Let's make sure we don't lose this contact, she gets it. Bryce looked at it like it was a loaded weapon. It was a mistake, he muttered. You didn't read, Owen cut in. And that's when the power shifted. Not with yelling, not with slammed fists or dramatic exits. Just paper, just silence. Just a boardroom full of people realizing the man they'd bet on hadn't just fumbled. He'd handed the ball to the other team and danced in the end zone. Karen finally spoke. You signed me out of a contract I still own. No heat, no ego, just fact. And fact, as Bryce was about to learn, didn't care how many press releases had your name on them. Bryce was sweating now. Not the cute kind. This was the flop sweat of a man realizing his parachute was stitched together with ego and buzzwords. He reached for his water, but his hand trembled just enough to clink the glass against the table. Owen Feldman didn't flinch. He opened the leather-bound folder beside him with the deliberation of a man accustomed to ending careers before lunch. Let's go ahead and walk through what you submitted to the client last week, he said. Bryce made a weak sound in his throat, somewhere between a chuckle and a plea. You know, Owen, I think we're getting tangled in some procedural. Owen held up a hand. We're going to read it together. He pulled out the final contract packet. Clean, tabbed, signed. He turned it to legal. Start with the compliance page. Their general counsel, a woman named Shaw with a courtroom poker face and a reputation for smelling blood before the rest of the room noticed, flipped to the appropriate section. She reads silently, eyes scanning line after line. Her brows crept inward. Then she stopped. Clause 4.2b. She tapped it with one lacquered fingernail. All federally sourced programs exceeding $50 million shall require final operational approval from the designated key operational officer, as filed in the most recent corporate governance resolution. Appendix C, Karen Foster. A silence fell so dense it felt like sound had been outlawed. Karen didn't blink. Bryce stared ahead, a 1,000-yard stare forming behind his eyes like his soul was trying to exit stage left. Shaw turned to him, slow and clinical. Your submission to the client included your signature alone. No coup, no Karen Foster. Analyze, the federal client rep closed her laptop with a quiet click. The sound might as well have been a gunshot. From our agency's standpoint, she said coolly, this document is incomplete. Invalid. If submitted under false authority, it may trigger audit flags and review suspension. We take compliance seriously. Bryce's voice cracked, but we're in too deep. The contract's already announced. The deal hasn't cleared, Owen said. What cleared was your arrogance, Bryce. And now we're exposed. The CEO finally spoke, though it sounded more like he was reading his own eulogy. Why wasn't this caught in internal review? Shaw answered with a shrug so slight it was almost cruel. It would have been if anyone had looped in the person who helped write the clause in the first place. She turned to Karen with a nod. That would have been you. Karen tapped her folder. I had a version ready, fully compliant, annotated, with my sign-off. All it needed was a request. Owen turned fully toward Bryce now. Tell me, he said, voice calm and venomous, you didn't sign her out of this deal. Bryce opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked like he'd swallowed a nail. Karen stood slowly, not to storm out, not to deliver some Oscar speech about loyalty or vision or betrayal. She simply walked around the table, picked up the contract packet from in front of legal, flipped to the signature page, and held it up. There was one name, Bryce Landon. She turned it around so the room could see. Congratulations, she said quietly. Submitted a $300 million federal contract with a non-compliant signature, invalidating governance, misrepresenting authority, and exposing this company to penalties up to and including breach of agreement. Bryce slumped into his chair like a deflated pool toy. Karen didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She placed the packet on the table, folded her hands over it, and said, this version is dead. If the client is still willing, need to draft a clean copy this time with the required signatory. She glanced at Annalise, who gave her a slight nod. Bryce looked around the room, searching for anyone to back him up. But all he found were lowered eyes, clenched jaws, and Owen Feldman's ice-cold stare. The room had shifted. The showboat had sunk. And the woman they'd tried to write out of the story, she now held the pen. The tension had curdled now, no longer sharp, thick and undeniable. Bryce sat there, wrecked in his designer chair, jaw slack, hands limp at his sides. Across from him, Karen stood cool and unflinching, the invalidated contract packet resting on the table like a spent shell casing. Owen Feldman leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice measured and steady. "Karen," he said, "will you be signing the deal?" She took a breath, not for drama, but precision. "Not this one." Then she sat, slow and deliberate, setting her folder down with the care of someone placing a cornerstone. "I'll need to resubmit the proper documentation," she said. "This version is invalid, legally, structurally, ethically." She glanced at legal, who nodded without hesitation. Then her eyes met the client's rep. "If your office still wants to move forward, we'll do it right, but with governance that respects federal compliance. And truth." Annalise tapped her pen on the table once. "We'd prefer that," she said, plainly. "Fact, we require it." The CEO cleared his throat. "Too little, too late. We'll support whatever next steps you advise, Karen." Of course they would. Now, Owen slid the dead packet aside like it was a coffee-stained napkin. "Then we're agreed. This draft is null." He didn't look at Bryce. He didn't need to. Two men from HR entered the boardroom without a word. One stood near the door. The other quietly approached Bryce and whispered something that made his eyes go wide. "Wait, hold on, you can't. This is a misunderstanding. We're on the verge of..." Karen didn't even glance his way. "This isn't about verge," she said. "It's about validation. And you just removed your own." The room stayed silent as Bryce was guided out. No dramatic protest, no thrown folders or broken glass. Just the soft shuffle of ruined pride across a polished floor. His nameplate would be gone by morning. His keycard probably already was. Karen opened a fresh binder in front of her. No fanfare, no speech. Just tabs, clauses, and compliance, every line built by her hand, every term designed to survive the egos of lesser men. She adjusted her seat at the head of the table now and uncapped her pen. No one moved, no one spoke. Owen raised a brow. "Well," he said gently, "shall we begin again?" Karen looked up, calm, anchored. Ruthless in that quiet way only the truly underestimated can be. "Already have?" Click. The pen met the paper. It wasn't just a signature. It was ownership reclaimed. It was architecture remembered. And it was Bryce's name being gently erased from the future he thought he'd rewritten. No confetti, no victory lap. Just Karen Foster, seated where she belonged. Blueprints in one hand, control in the other, and not a single person left at the table who dared forget it. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.